My grandparents wanted a fresh life too, but they never wanted to forget anything. My grandfather, he smuggled pictures of his family through the camps. And those pictures were in their bedroom for their lives. That way they could see their family, they could look at their family. The way it was so simple, you'd think that the Nazis were so thorough, but they weren't. They would have them stand at a pell, and my grandfather would just hold them in his closed fists when he was standing at attention. And they never had him open his hands.
I'm grateful to be here today with Alex Levine, if you heard what I heard, interviewee and advisor. Alex is an entrepreneur of multiple businesses on the East Coast, husband, father of one, soon to be two, and dedicated 3G. Alex sat on the board for the American Society for Yad Vashem Young Leadership Associates. He's currently involved with the Holocaust Council for the Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey and the Young Family Committee for Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's really an honor. Holocaust history and family legacy has always been important to you for the majority of your life. Can you share a bit about why you chose to share your grandfather's story with If You Heard What I Heard?
Sure. So I chose to share my grandfather, Ed Mosberg, his story. It was a story that I heard growing up. Both he and my grandmother, Cecile, they both were from Krakow, Poland. They both had normal childhoods, intact families, and then the Holocaust happened. And my grandmother, her story of survival was something she did not want to talk about. It happened, but I don't want to talk about it. And my grandfather was the opposite end of the scale. He wanted to talk about the Holocaust. He wanted to make sure that it never got forgotten. Not that my grandmother wanted it forgotten. She just did not want to relive the horrors of what she went through. And when my grandmother passed away and my grandfather was sick with cancer, I realized Holocaust denial was something that had gone on for many years prior to our recording. And unfortunately, as we know, since October 7th, that atrocities against Jewish people is something that that deniers will continue to do. It didn't even take 80 years, not 100, not 80. We didn't even get to the 80-year mark. And we had the second deadliest attack against Jewish people since the Holocaust. And that's one of the reasons why I share. It's a major concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And for your grandfather too, I can't imagine that it was, you said your grandmother didn't want to relive it, but for your grandfather, he would wear the uniform that he wore in the camps to drive home the point of what happened to our people. And so I can't imagine that for him it was easy to relive that. But do you think it was just like a strength in him to power through because the need to share the story and the importance of sharing the story for him was greater than his comfort level or uncomfort level?
Absolutely. My grandmother was the strongest, and my grandfather, they both were the strongest people I have ever met. There wasn't anything that they couldn't do if they wanted to. It was something that was so deeply ingrained in him to just never stop, keep pushing forward, to just live his life as if every single day was his last day. And unfortunately, because of what he went through in the camps, that's how he had to live. And so that strength made him have this drive to push the point home, to make sure that, as you said, to make sure that there could not be denial.
Yeah. I can't imagine that was easy for him. And even for you, growing up with the story and traveling to Poland with him to the camps, what has it been like for you to continue sharing his story? I can't imagine it's been easy for you to relive it either.
My grandfather, he showed, For the most part, positive emotions. He really didn't show sadness. He tried to just be happy and joking and the class clown. That was the way he wanted to live his life. With everything that he went through, he wanted to just have a positive life. He was the only person in his entire family to survive. At 15 years old, he was an orphan and he had no one. He had two sisters, a set of parents, uncles, aunts, grandparents, cousins, and he was the only one to survive. And my grandmother became his whole world, his whole life. And after she passed, everything was really gone at that point in time. And aside from that, talking about his sisters, which he didn't like to talk about when they were in Plaszow concentration camp, he worked in Amon Get's office. And through working in his office, he heard that it seemed to be the best thing to stay in the back of the line. And so he would tell his sisters, stay in the back of the line, stay in the back of the line. And it worked for a little bit. And then one day they told everyone to turn around during selection. And they were transported to Stutthof. And they lined up 8,000 Jewish women along the beach. And they shot them with machine guns. And the next morning was liberation. And my grandfather felt like that was his fault, that it was his fault that they were killed, that if he didn't do anything, if he just let them stay where they were naturally during selection, maybe they might have lived. And that was a guilt that he carried for his whole life.
That survivor's guilt is real and it's terrible. And I think, you know, how that translates down to us is a feeling, at least for me and my family, it was always like, I just want to make it better for my grandfather. I want to do whatever I can to honor those who were lost, but just take away that pain for him. And you can't.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. How did that translate for you? Like in your life, like do you think about your great aunts at all or in your life today?
So I am a namesake. My Hebrew name is Eliezer Yosef. Yosef was my grandmother's younger brother. He was one of the 1.1 million children that were murdered in Auschwitz. And Eliezer was after two names. Laser was a Yiddish name, and Eli was another name that they combined, Eliezer, for great grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. Same thing with Alexander. That was my grandfather's older sister's fiance, who my grandfather was very fond of. All of them were murdered. So it definitely does translate down. There's tons of books and studies about generational trauma. We have a very small family that should have been significantly larger.
Yeah, we have that in my family too. And it's really just like a common thread with a lot of 3Gs. And I think that because of that, there's such a close tie to holding on to family and being close to family because of how much was lost. And we
Absolutely.
certainly feel that. We certainly feel that today.
No, I didn't really exactly answer your question. The way it translates into my life is I'm unapologetically Jewish. I'm unapologetically Zionistic. And I am unapologetic in the way that I live my life.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you share some examples of that?
Absolutely. Zionistic, the state of Israel is our homeland. I love the state of Israel. Forget about the politics, forget the policies. That's our home. It always has been, it always will be. In regards to Jewishness, I'm not the most religious person. We go to synagogue. Our son Caleb, he goes to Jewish day school. A very important value, something that was very important for my grandparents, that there was a Jewish education, that we never forgot where we came from. Because they also grew up in Jewish households. My grandfather's mother would light Shabbat candles every Shabbat. And although my great grandmother was religious, my great grandfather was not. And they respected the way each other lived. He would go out and handle the business on Saturdays while she would want to be at home for Shabbat. And that's something that has translated down to us as well, the unapologetic Jewishness.
Yeah, it's interesting your thoughts on Israel. I think a lot of us as 3Gs feel that as well because had Israel existed our families likely would not have been murdered, or at least not to the scale at which they were.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And we saw that recently with Amsterdam, that Israel sent planes to get our people out as quickly as
Hmm.
possible. And you
Absolutely.
can't help but think, if Israel was around back then, how different things would have been.
I absolutely agree. I think it wouldn't have been to the magnitude.
Yeah.
There,
Yeah.
there definitely globally, there's a level of, I want to say, respect or fear, either which way, of Israel and the power, that the military might that they have.
Yeah.
It's funny because we're not a very athletic group. Jewish people are we're not bodybuilders. We don't really do that kind of stuff. We're very academic. We're very not to sound obnoxious. We're a very smart bunch. And the state of Israel is just filled with warriors.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because we've done like a couple self-defense classes with a real ally for our community. I think that warrior mentality, I think we're seeing that go beyond Israel and cultivate more in the diaspora. Yeah. Alex, your grandfather was still alive when we filmed. Did he have a chance to respond to your interview? And what was his reaction if he did have a chance?
He knew I was filming. At the end of my grandfather's life, unfortunately, my grandfather went through 3 bouts of stage 4 cancer, and it got worse and worse for him as expected, unfortunately. And when I filmed, he was in the middle of going through chemotherapy. He was in the middle of, he had to have some surgeries, and he just wasn't really himself. So he wasn't able to really, he also wasn't able to really watch it. It wasn't something that was within his technical savvy. But he did know about it, and he had said to me, had said to my parents, that it's important to continue talking about the Holocaust, and he was happy I was doing it. He also would have very happily done an interview with you himself, told you his story. That was his mentality, and it's understandable. While survivors are alive, listen to the survivors. Let them tell you their firsthand testimony.
Yeah. It's a big thing for us. Like, I never want to take away from somebody hearing from a survivor. The hope with our work is that if you wouldn't have otherwise normally heard from a survivor, or if you don't know that much about the Holocaust, that our stories are a gateway in, that it's like the first line of knowledge, of learning about the stories on a personal level through us, so that someone who does watch will be inspired to go and watch your grandfather's show a foundation interview, or listen to a survivor, go to a museum. It's just meant to be that gateway. But it is important for us to know, to have the reaction of Holocaust survivors while we can. I think resoundingly, the response from Holocaust survivors that I've received, they just say thank you. They're just grateful. To your point, they just want to know that the stories are going to continue.
That they won't be forgotten. They and their story and what happened to everyone.
Yeah, and I think there's a real fight within us as 3Gs to keep those stories alive. We have that energy and that fire to keep it going.
Hmm. Absolutely, we do.
Yeah. I get asked a lot, what is the difference between 2Gs being the children of survivors and 3Gs? And I really think it is like that time and distance. And I think it's also with 3Gs, I think there's an additional sense of obligation because we know we're the last generation to hear it from them.
And in addition to that, when my grandparents in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, people didn't want to hear about the Holocaust. Survivor's guilt was huge. Obviously, it was a huge factor, but people were not ready. They didn't understand it, and they didn't want to understand it because it was so horrible. It was so unbelievable. Literally, the word unbelievable. People could not believe, they didn't want to believe that it was happening. And I think as time went on and they had these large events like the Deborah Lipstadt case and other events that were global, people became a little bit more open to hearing about it.
Yeah.
My grandfather didn't speak about the Holocaust until I don't actually know exactly what year it was, but my dad was going on a men's mission to Israel with other men from the synagogue that I grew up going to. And my grandparents wanted to come to the airport and say goodbye to my dad before he left. And my grandfather said to my mom, "Go take your mother for a walk." And he just started talking to them about the Holocaust because they knew that he was a survivor. And one of them asked him something, and he knew my grandmother was going to be very unhappy if he spoke about what happened. So he had her go for a walk, and he just started talking about it. It was way many, many years before I was born. And the raw emotion, he was so emotional about it. And that was really when he had the awakening. And that's, I think, what a lot of survivors had is
Yeah.
that at a certain point, they realized, I don't know how long I'm going to live. I don't know. I have no family history. I don't know if there's any pre existing conditions because my parents were killed when I was 13 or 14 or 15 years old. I don't have grandparents. I don't know how the longevity is. I don't know what kind of other issues that I'm going to develop because of the conditions I lived in. He got liberated with tuberculosis of the lungs and bones. And my grandmother with typhoid fever.
Wow. Yeah. I think the fact that they were able to build families and have kids was such a miracle coming out of the conditions that they came out of and with the health conditions that they came out of the camps with as well. Yeah, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable what these survivors did with their lives after.
100%. My grandfather and grandmother, they moved to Belgium. They lived there for 6 months because you had to live there for 6 months to get civilly married. They got religiously married. So that's a year. And then they got visas and came to the US. And when they got here, they had the $15. They had nothing. And my grandmother worked a little bit in the beginning. She worked, I believe, as a movie theater usher with him. And then he started working 3 jobs because he didn't want her to work. Because as bad as he had it, and you hear in my story, he got beaten viciously to an inch of death by 4 men for stealing bread. And he said, if I had it bad, your grandmother had it worse. And she never wanted to talk about what happened. And there was things that she would say here and there. My grandmother was in a camp and they were making munitions in a munition factory. And she realized that the bullets she was making, she said, either they were going to kill Jews or they could have been used to kill me. So sometimes on purpose, she would mess them up and they would beat her. And sometimes because she was a 14-year-old kid that had never worked at a munitions factory, she messed them up because she didn't know what she was doing. And they beat her anyway. So she said, if I'm going to get beaten, let it be because I'm preventing them from killing me and other Jewish people.
Wow. What a hero to do that. The bravery that took on her part, unbelievable. One of our other interviewees, Dr. Melissa Wasserman, shares that about her grandmother as well, that she was in a munitions factory and just the guilt that she felt knowing that the bullets that she was making were going to be used to kill her people. Just a terrible psychological torture from that alone. It's just awful.
Well, and like you hear from other interviewees, from other people, that they found out that their parents or their grandparents or their siblings were dead because they found items like a handkerchief or whatever. A gold ring is gold rings. That's hard to determine, but some kind of piece of jewelry that was so distinctive or something. And my grandmother, she knew that her mother was killed because she saw her body being dragged.
It's just awful. Like the things that our grandparents had to witness, it's unfathomable, really. And I think that's another reason why it's so important to share these stories. Yeah. So after sharing your story with us, did you discover anything new either through conversations with your grandfather or additional research?
So I knew my grandparents' story, or my grandfather's the best. My grandmother, like I said, it was very, I got pieces of it because she didn't want to talk about what happened. But I knew their stories very well because my grandfather used to speak all over. And very frequently he would have me go with him because he had the uniforms and he had other artifacts that he would bring with him. Like he had a Nazi stamp from the camps that if you got the stamp on your card, your paper, then you got to live from whether it be, I'm sorry, not in the camps, in the ghetto, rather. And he had other kinds of artifacts. They were big, heavy bags because he would just, when he would go to Poland, he would see them in flea markets and he would buy them.
Wow. Wow. He just
So I
wanted
knew
to
his
hold
story
on
very
to.
well. When he would go, he would speak in different settings. Like he would speak with schools, he would speak in like the state police of New Jersey or NYPD or Port Authority, or he would go speak in different corporations. And he would bring these artifacts with him to show people. Because when you hear about it, it's one thing. When you see it, seeing is believing.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's absolutely right. But also the bravery on his part to take those objects because it's just that's another reminder of what happened. Like my grandparents came here and my grandmother wanted everything new. Like she didn't want to relive any part of what was.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My grandparents had a lot of friends who they just wanted to start a fresh life. My grandparents wanted a fresh life too, but they never wanted to forget anything. My grandfather, he smuggled pictures of his family through the camps. And those pictures were in their bedroom for their lives. That way they could see their family, they could look at their family.
So that's one of the things that like when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, how? There are so many aspects of these stories that you're like, how did you survive this crazy thing? How did you manage to get from here to there? How did you manage to keep photos safe in the middle of craziness?
Concentration camp. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And my grandfather, the way it was so simple, you'd think that the Nazis were so thorough, but they weren't. They would have them stand at a rappel, and my grandfather would just hold them in his closed fists when he was standing at attention. And open your mouth, so he would open his mouth. They would check his pockets. They never had him open his hands.
Wow. How big are the photos though?
They're small, maybe 2 inch by 2 inch. They were like wallet-sized pictures.
wow. And he just managed to hold on to
And
them.
some of them were maybe, I don't know, 4 by 8s or something, but he folded them. Some of them, I think he might have even either the crease marks were so bad on them or he had to rip them so he could hold them in both hands.
So
But
crazy.
he
And then
kept them, and he
what did
kept
he
them in every single camp that he was transported to.
so what did he do when he had to use his hands to work? He put them like didn't
Put
his
them in
uniform
his
have a
pocket.
pocket?
Yeah, he put them in his uniform pocket.
Wow. Wow. And you hear these things and you're just it's a miracle. Every aspect of these stories of survival is a miracle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just like
Actually, he also had a picture of my grandmother too, because they met in Velichka, which is a salt mine right outside of Krakow and Plaszow, and they were assigned to sort clothing together. And that's how they met. He was sorting clothing with this woman, Matilda, or this teenage girl, Matilda. And they're sorting, and Matilda sees this girl, and she, oh my God, that's my sister, Cecilia. That was my grandmother, Cecilia.
wow.
And so they were sorting clothing together. That's how they met. And my grandmother she gave him a hard time at first because he had a key to a room. And that room had gold and silver and diamonds and whatever that they were removing from the clothing. And she said, why don't you open up that door so we can take out some gold and some diamonds and whatever so we can bribe the Nazis and get better food? And he said, it's not my stuff. If we steal it, we're no better than them. And then she said, that's why no one likes you. And then she ended up giving him a picture, a little two by two, tiny little picture that he again carried through the camps.
And they found that picture while they were sorting. It's not like she had
No,
that.
she had a small. I don't know. She had a small picture of her.
It's unbelievable.
That part was never explained of if she was carrying around a small picture of herself or what the situation was. But he had that picture and he actually put it in a necklace that he wore every day.
Of your grandmother.
My grandmother.
So sweet. The two of them, they built such a beautiful life for themselves that he was able to get to a point where he was successful enough in business that he could enjoy the fruits of his labor as well.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
my grandfather, he worked those 3 jobs and he worked so unbelievably hard. And then he went from working those 3 odd jobs. He sewed pocketbooks by hand. That was one of his first jobs, one of those 3. And a friend of his worked in the Diamond District. His name was Sam Hursley, and he was best friends with my grandfather. He was in Auschwitz with my grandmother. And my grandmother, one of the reasons that she survived is because Sam, he tended to the pigs. He managed that was one of his jobs. And so he would feed the pigs that the Nazis would then eat. And so he would steal some of the pig slop, which was like hay and mud and whatever is in pig slop. And he would eat a little bit of it and he would give some of it to my grandmother and the woman who he ended up marrying. And that's one of the ways that she survived. So they ended up going into business together, he and Sam, and they had a diamond factory. And eventually they wound that up and they downsized to a small room on 47th Street in the Diamond District. And then he ended up going from there into real estate development. And that was his career for the rest of his life.
Yeah. And it's your family business today, right?
It is. Yes.
Yeah. What a legacy, right?
Yeah. So it's really a perfect word to say that they built a life for
Yeah.
themselves because he was a builder.
So being a 3G, how has seeing the rise of anti-Semitism affected you?
It is devastating. Anti-Semitism always existed. I've known that. When I was a kid, we went to Paris and my parents wanted to go to a Friday night service in a synagogue. So we went to a synagogue and I was like 11 or 12. And I remember because in the US, we didn't have this. We didn't have this. Thank God at that point, we didn't really have this problem. But in Paris, they had razor wire fencing and armed guards with machine guns or rifles outside of the gate and inside of the gate to get into the synagogue. So I always knew that anti-Semitism existed. I always knew that we're the scapegoat. Here we go. It's our turn again. And it's something that like we know it's in our history. Every couple of generations, we get tapped and we're going to try and kill you. That's what happens every couple of generations to the Jews. And like the Holocaust, like the pogroms, like the Spanish Inquisition, like every single attack on Jews, just like October 7th, we survived it and we will thrive.
Yeah. Yeah, there's this like survivor mentality that we have as 3Gs. So for you, when you see anti-Semitic incidents happening today, what comes up for you? What's your like first reaction as a 3G?
My first thought is, here we go again. Anti-Semitism is rearing its ugly head. We're not even 100 years out of the Holocaust. And we have these issues all over again. And it's completely unchecked. And I'm not saying that being afraid isn't something I'm feeling. Obviously, I'm scared. I'm not scared. I'm scared for my children. I'm scared for my son. My wife is pregnant. For our 2 children, God willing, in May that we have our son. I'm scared for their future. I'm not afraid right now for me. I'm afraid of what's going to happen when we're well over 100 years away from the Holocaust. I'm afraid of when October 7th is 20 years from now and it was a thing of the past. Obviously, something in between will, I'm sure, unfortunately happen, but that's my concern of what will it be then.
So does that affect how you're raising your kids or how you will continue to raise your kids? Are you going to raise them with more of that warrior mentality? Are you going to make sure that they're like prepared for the future? What steps are you going to take?
They're going to be unapologetically Jewish. They don't need to be religious. They can be as religious as they want, but they have to be unapologetically Jewish. They have to be unapologetically Zionistic. The state of Israel is part of Jewish survival. It is. It just 100% is. And on top of that, they need to remember where they came from. At a certain point, I went to the concentration camps. I visited them. I went with my grandparents, and my parents were on a family trip. I've chaperoned trips to Auschwitz, to Majdanek, and other camps. And I'm going to take my kids. So that way they see it. I want them seeing is believing. They'll believe it. They'll know the stories in depth and in detail when it's appropriate for them. At a certain point, they'll get a G version or a PG version. But eventually, they'll have to learn the whole story, and we'll go. And afterwards, after doing such a heavy, mentally heavy trip, we'll go to Israel. We'll go to our homeland so they can be unapologetically Jewish, so they can have Jewish joy.
Yeah, it's really important to have those moments of Jewish joy. It's funny, I was in a meeting yesterday and showing somebody our Instagram and some of the videos and reels that we've had, and they asked, what was the last event that you did? Or there was something about one of our events. And I showed them the event that we had in New York last
Mhm.
May. We did a Sunset Stories, like a cocktail event that you spoke at.
Yes.
And there's like light music that comes on when you play that
Mhm.
reel. And she was like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. And I was like, what do you mean? She said, you run a Holocaust organization and here's this like light, happy music and all of the stuff. And I said, yeah, because that's a part of it. It's not about, it is about remembering the past and remembering the pain and remembering what happened, but it's celebrating the survival. And the fact that we get to be here today, we should celebrate that. So, with that, we are hosting a concert with Matisyahu on March 18th in New York City. And it's called A Night of Resilience. And it's called A Night of Resilience because that's who we are as 3Gs. We're living proof of their resilience. So we should come together and celebrate that. And it's going to be a wonderful night of Jewish joy. And I hope everyone listening who lives in the tri state area will join us. How has your perspective changed on what your grandparents went through post October 7th? We've just experienced this insane attack on our people, the largest attack on our people since the Holocaust. And having grandparents who survived the Holocaust, how has October 7th impacted you or changed your perspective on what they went through?
So, like I had said, every couple of generations, there is a group of people that tries to kill us, and they don't succeed. We survive it, and we thrive. We always do, and we always will. Now, that being said, I always knew that anti Semitism existed. I always knew that people wanted to kill Jews, people wanted the state of Israel to not exist. I never really experienced any of that anti Semitism. I never felt it anywhere I went in my life. And when October 7th happened, I realized just how quickly the tides can change, just how quickly things can shift. And it's really been difficult to process and deal with the fact that it can happen again. Never again was supposed to be words, but it was also supposed to have meaning.
Yeah. I think for a lot of us, our grandparents said never again, and they said we can never forget. But I don't know that a lot of us really thought it could actually happen or was going to actually happen again.
I would also have thought that at the very least there would be outcry globally
100%.
against the attack. I really thought you're always going to have the group who does it and the groups who support it and the groups who don't want to be involved. But I would have thought that globally, it's so easy because they do it for so many other people where they say it's not okay. I would have thought that there would have been a little bit more sympathy. The sympathy was on October 8th, maybe October 9th. Then the sympathy was gone. I would have thought there would have been a little bit more outcry against it, that there would have been more condemnation. And at the end of the day, that if this was any other country, and I'm sure a lot of people share the same sentiments, if it was the United States and Mexico or Canada invaded and kidnapped people and killed, with the US, it's 300 million. So let's call it, I don't know, 40,000 people,
Yeah.
and then retreated back into Mexico with hostages, no one would tell the United States, don't do it.
Or
No
hold
one would
back.
tell the United States, hold back. No one would say nothing about the hostages. It would be a totally different scenario.
Yeah, the thing that I can't wrap my head around is the outcry for the people who did this. It's there's so much sympathy for the people who perpetuated this hate and zero sympathy for the people who are victims of it, who are
Right.
innocent, who did
Right.
nothing.
Right.
Unbelievable. The PR
And
machine
forget
behind
about
that is
Hamas or Palestinians and supporting or not supporting or whatever. That is a whole topic that
yeah, no
we
one
could
wants
delve
to
into.
see
Forget
any
about that.
no one wants to see any innocent person affected.
Right.
No
And
one. No.
forget about if the Palestinian people overwhelmingly, 75% of them support this. Forget about those numbers for a minute. They took hostages. Should we just not get them back?
Yeah.
Should we just let it be? That's the world. What the world is saying is you can't go after these people because they took hostages and they killed a significant percentage. There's That's the largest Jewish population outside of the United States. Israel is the largest Jewish population in the world. So 1,200 people out of 14 million Jews globally. Maybe we're a little bit more. Maybe we're like 15-ish million now, whatever it is. That's a huge percentage of our population.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're still not even fully back to the numbers that we were before the Holocaust.
Right. Right.
So as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, what's that like for you, seeing all of this? And you express, and I share your sentiments completely with where is the outrage, but is there anything else that comes up for you or different perspective because you have this trauma and this survivor mentality in your DNA?
So what really comes up, like we said, is the survivor, the warrior mentality. But having Jewish children, having it's so important. And having your children have Jewish children and meet Jewish people and marry Jewish people, lador vador, generation to generation. Like I said, I'm not such a religious person, but Judaism is a religion and Judaism is an identity
Yeah.
with the qualities that, the ethos in Judaism. And that's what I carry. Maybe not the religious side of things, overly religious, but the ethos of it. There's a lot of religion that we do observe, but there's more of the identity.
Yeah.
And I think that's our answer. When anti-Semites come after us, the best thing that we can do is to be loud and proud.
100%.
Like I have a chai. I wear it every single day. This also is my grandmother's number that I wear. That was from a friend of mine who has a jewelry company, and she donates her proceeds to Holocaust education and remembrance.
Yeah.
I wear my chai every single day. I don't wear it in my shirt. If I'm out, if I go to the beach, I wear my chai. I don't care. Being loud and proud of being Jewish.
So seeing the Super Bowl was just this past weekend, and Kanye had an ad, and that ad drove to a
Oh my
website.
God.
That
Oh, the only thing that he had on for his merch was a beautiful shirt with a swastika on it. The fact that we're giving this guy airtime right now is exactly what he wants, unfortunately.
so should we cut this from the
No,
podcast?
no. But that being said, it's not exactly a surprise. He's made so many anti-Semitic comments, and he's just a mentally unstable person. That's really what it comes down to. He's just a sick person. At the end of the day, if someone said that about another group, he wouldn't be too keen on it. If someone said the same thing, let's sell KKK shirts, I think he'd be pretty upset too. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, what your religion is, what you believe, your preferences, just live your life. Don't impose your views on others and live your life privately, but be proud of who you are.
I think that the scary thing with seeing a T-shirt being sold with a swastika is that this is a person who has 32 million followers. Yeah, he has more followers than there are Jews in the world.
1,000%. A
You know,
thousand
like
percent.
almost twice as many. And so what message is it sending to those people? I think when you have a platform, you have a responsibility. And clearly he
Absolutely.
believes in what he's pushing. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous to us. And
This
the
is the kind of
shocking
rhetoric that caused Nazi Germany to come to fruition.
But the thing that is the scariest about it is, to your point, the lack of outcry. Where is the outrage? Like, for the most part, it's the Jewish population that is standing up and saying this is not okay. Now, that said, I
There are
have
some
seen,
allies.
oh my gosh, I have seen a wonderful amount of my non-Jewish friends who have posted and shared and
Mhm.
spoken up against the hate. And God love those people. Seriously. For
It makes
those
us feel
who
like
are
we're not alone because we feel isolated as Jews
100%,
today. That's the
100%.
other thing. Since October 7th, I would say a large portion of my friends are Jewish. And that's not because I don't want non Jewish friends. I live in a Jewish community. My son goes to a Jewish day school. It's just easy to be around Jewish people. I live in a neighborhood with a lot of religious Jews too. But it feels, aside from, like I said, I have a group of amazing friends who are not Jewish, who are unbelievably supportive, who are disgusted with people like Kanye, with the October 7th attack, with the fact that nationally there are crickets, there's pin drop silence
Yeah.
about what's going on. But if I did not have those non Jewish friends, it would feel totally isolating.
Yeah. It makes such a huge difference. I don't know that our non-Jewish friends truly understand the weight of them standing up for us. Makes such a it's like a world of difference for us.
Probably
Such a
not.
huge difference.
Such a
Yeah.
simple thing of just, this is ridiculous, or I'm so sorry, or I'm so disgusted. Hearing that from someone who's not being affected,
Yeah.
it is a huge weight lifted.
Yeah. It is. Makes a huge difference. And I can't say enough about our allies. We need more of them, which is why we're doing
Mhm.
this work, which is why we're trying to cultivate more of those allies through our work, through making this personal connection of sharing these stories.
Absolutely.
And so with that, you've been involved with our organization pretty much from the beginning, and you've really seen a lot of growth. And what has it been like for you to be a part of this organization and helping to build this organization, to see it grow as an advisor for us, but also as the grandson of Holocaust survivors?
So wearing both hats, wearing the advisor hat, I'm gonna cheer and toe the line and be do exactly what I'm supposed to do. But as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, I'm so unbelievably proud. This organization is it's the cool kid on the block, according to the Jewish Journal. We were delegates at the United Nations for International Holocaust Day, which, forget about the UN not even going there. The fact that we represent Jews, a group of Jews, or Jews generally, the fact that we represent a segment of Holocaust remembrance is huge. The fact that you have Matisyahu doing concerts, that you have people like Josh Gad, you have people like Ari Ackerman, you have influencers, you have famous people doing interviews, being involved. That's massive growth. And although we're a small organization and we're just getting started, it's also a testament to you and the work that
Well,
you've put in.
thank you for that. It's all of us, really. I mean, it takes a village, right? Like,
For sure. It does.
it's all of us. And I will say that I'm very grateful that those with large voices and large platforms have trusted us to share their stories. But they're also, they're like you and me, they're grandkids of Holocaust survivors, and they feel the same responsibility that we feel to get those stories out there and make sure it doesn't die.
Absolutely.
And there is something really nice about that, about just connecting with other 3Gs. Like, even in starting this and finding the community that we have, to me, it's incredibly special, but
Mhm.
there's like a unspoken bond that we all have, because we know what it means to have to fight and stand up for our religion. We know what it means to know the importance of Israel. We know what it means to have grandparents that like have this family history, to have smaller families because of this event.
I think 3Gs also, we have uh, a connection, like a magnetic connection to each other. We have this understanding, an unspoken bond to each other because of what we grew up with. There's so much commonality. There's so many people that I speak to who are grandchildren. There's so much crossing of stories. And I have the person that made that piece of jewelry for my grandmother. Her name is Dana. And we were talking at a gala for Yad Vashem. And we were talking about our grandparents, and we had just met that night. Excuse me, we had just met that night. And he told me, oh, my grandparents are from Czechoslovakia and blah, 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 blah. And she told me her grandmother's number. Or I said, oh, yeah, did you know your grandmother's number? So I told her my grandmother's number. Her grandmother's number was within a few hundred of mine.
Wow.
And the likelihood, because of the jobs that they had, they probably knew each other. And as we're talking about that, some guy turns around and he said, did you just say A262414, whatever the number was? Yeah. My grandfather's number was A2413, the number before. They were standing next to each other in line. It was just,
Wow.
like I said, so much commonality. Like another person, Ari Sarna, who interviewed with you,
Yeah.
as his grandfather and my grandfather were liberated from
Mauthausen.
Mauthausen, from a sub camp called Linz.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. We have another interviewee, Adina, who also same thing. Now I'm getting it confused. Dachau or Linz, but her grandfather was also in the same camp. It's crazy to hear that the intersection of these stories. Yeah. And so with that, to end on a lighter note, I asked you this last time, I'm gonna ask it again. What's a family tradition that you have and carry with you that either was left from the Holocaust or that your grandparents developed after the Holocaust?
Like any good Jewish family, food is a big part. My grandmother never really cooked. It wasn't her forte. She would do simple things, but she was an amazing baker, like an unbelievable baker. And my grandmother would make apple squares and mandel bread and banana bread and cupcakes and all kinds of things. And the apple squares, that was the thing that was coveted, at least by me growing up. And she would make 4 trays at once and just send them over with my grandfather and with her when they would come visit. And then they'd throw them in the freezer and pull them out every couple of weeks to enjoy them. And my mom, who is an amazing cook, but she doesn't really bake so much. So my grandmother was still baking throughout most of my whole childhood and into my teenage years, college years, etc. I would get them up to school and college. I would get these, as I call them, shipments. And my wife, Lara, she got the recipe from my mom because my mom, she would do it, and it would be close. But when my wife, Lara, makes them, there's something that's not 100%. I don't know whether it's like my grandmother used a certain brand of brown sugar or something.
Yeah.
It's like the exact same thing.
That's great. Lara gets it like as close as possible.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
There's one, like I said, I don't know if there's something that's so minutely off you would never know if you didn't know.
Yeah.
My mom, like, these are amazing. These taste just, and I'm like, they taste almost just, but they are like 99.9% there. And I don't know
Yeah.
what it is. And there are certain things like my grandmother made a mandel bread recipe and Lara tried to make it and it didn't. My grandmother would make it and it would come out one way. Lara made it and she was like, there's something missing from here.
Oh my God.
Maybe my grandmother did it on purpose so it could never be replicated. I don't know.
I think they also had my grandmother had her 1950s kitchen that, like, didn't change from the 50s, same stove, same oven. So there must be something with, like, even oven temperature. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Do you ever make them with Lara, or she does that on her own?
She does it. I
Yeah.
stay out of her way because I know how to cook. I do not know how to bake.
Yeah.
Baking is incredibly precise. And although I'm very precise in my work and business, when I cook, I don't measure. I just do it by eye and that would not work.
Does Caleb ever help her make the apple squares?
Not apple squares yet. That's complicated, but he does things like chocolate chip cookies.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good one.
Little
But
simple
those
things. So
yeah. And where do you think that recipe came from for the apple squares? Do you think your grandmother learned that from her mother or had that or no?
it was definitely like an Americana New York Times type of recipe or something like that that she just made one time and really liked it.
Nice. But it's your family tradition. It's something that's
Yes.
good. And there's something really beautiful about that too, because they came here and built a new life, and that
Mhm.
recipe is part of that.
They had nothing, so that was part of what they rebuilt.
Yeah. Yeah. Alex, thank you so much for everything you do for our organization and for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you so much for everything. Thanks for having me.